Hello, my name is Becopin, and you are watching Rappler. Our guest today is Major General Dave Yarker, the commander of the Canadian Armed Forces Cyber Command. He's in town for a couple of days, and we are very grateful that he's made time in his busy schedule to talk to us about his visit to Manila, cybersecurity, and an increasingly perilous information and security environment. Welcome to Manila. Welcome to Rappler, sir.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, Bea.
Okay, so you're here for a few days. Why a visit to Manila and why now?
Why now is because we in Canada find ourselves in an increasingly perilous world. CAFCYBERCOM, the organization I have the pleasure to lead, stood up merely 10 months ago.
Wow.
As we get our feet underneath us, we're beginning to explore where are those partnerships in the world that we think would be most impactful to deliver security, both for Canada as well as for, frankly, the region and the globe.
Yeah.
So that's why now, why Manila. Frankly, we see the Philippines as a very credible potential partner.
Right.
Philippines sits obviously in a very strategic place in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right.
We believe as Canada that we have some knowledge and some skills in the cyber domain. We've spent a fair amount of time over the past 2 or 3 years developing methodologies and skills at partnering with other nations. Latvia, for instance, we have a very strong partnership with, and believe that it was at least worth exploring such a partnership with the Philippines.
Less than a year already, you're thinking about partnerships, expanding your reach. Why is it so important to establish that network right away, even as you're still, basically solidifying the command at this point, right?
Yeah, so, cyber is one of those things where the more partners you have, the more colleagues you have, the more people that you can share information with, the more likely it is to succeed. Very much cyber is a team sport. In fact, one of the very first quotes I was ever given as I joined the cyber community over 15 years ago now was that cyber is a team sport with no bench limit. That no bench limit bit is important. It means that more partners are better, and the deeper the partnership you can build, the better. The better here meaning the more likely that Canada can remain secure from cyber threats, but also, frankly, the more likely that Canada, its allies and partners can remain free of those same threats.
It's like learning from each other, but also like watching out for each other? Is it something like that?
Learning from each other, watching out for each other. There's a key piece of if you find a cyber adversary in one place, they're likely using the same technique somewhere else.
Right.
They become easier to find if you've found them somewhere. So if you share that information, that really matters. So that's one level of partnership and information sharing that matters. The next is that no one, I don't think, has really mastered how to do cyberspace yet and how to do cybersecurity. That means that a diversity of opinions, a diversity of experience, there is a lot to learn from pretty much anywhere that we've ever operated or worked with other partners. So there are these multiple levels of advantage that come from partners, which is why we've prioritized pretty heavily building partnerships in cyber operations. That's from a pure cyber perspective. More broadly, Canada published its Indo-Pacific strategy a few years ago now. As a new member of the CAF, we are now looking to do our part to execute inside that broader strategy, which also has focused a significant amount of effort in the Indo-Pacific in general and in the Philippines in specific.
I'm going to ask more about the Indo-Pacific later, but you mentioned 15 years ago you encountered that quote, you first entered into the world of cyber. This might be a poor metaphor, but I also remember when I was in university, it was a very different media landscape. Like, Twitter wasn't the same thing it is today. Well, it's a very different thing nowadays. It's not even called Twitter anymore. But could you walk us through what has changed, what has remained the same, and how do you even keep up with how fast things change in the information, the cyber environment?
Yeah, when I joined the Army, we barely had computers at all anywhere. So there's a couple of components embedded in that. Militaries as organizations tend to be very good at stability. They're designed to be stable. Cyber is an environment where that's not really rewarded very strongly. Cyber is an environment where we see this rapid change, this rapid evolution. So building cyber operators, cyber officers, and military cyber forces capable of being agile, reactive, capable of growing and evolving is really one of the core tenets, I think, of getting it right and doing it well. And it goes back to one of the points that I've sort of already mentioned. The diversity really matters. The diversity of thought, the diversity of opinions, the diversity of engagement and partners makes forces stronger because it forces them to examine and confront some of the assumptions that may have been relevant when Twitter was a thing, but perhaps not when X is a thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is a very real challenge. Nothing makes it go away. But we do spend some effort trying to build forces that at least respect the fact that we know that the domain and the environment is going to evolve very quickly. That involves building experts. It involves enabling those experts to bring their expertise to the table. And those are the sorts of structures that we aim to build.
It's like future-proofing as you make sense of the present.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to say we're future-proofing.
We would hope.
Yeah, we are future risk reducing, I guess. Like there's no proof.
Right.
There will always be challenges.
Right. Right. We were talking about this off cam earlier, right? Going back to basics. Like, I think it's for civilians, for people who are not attuned to the world of cybersecurity, cyber defense. I feel like it's a little easier to imagine the Navy, the Army, even the Marines, the Air Force, right? But when we speak of a cyber command, what does that even entail?
Yeah, so every nation's cyber command is a little bit different. So let's focus on the cyber defense component that exists in just about every cyber command. Cyber defense is about keeping computer networks and computer capabilities safe. It's about ensuring that they aren't compromised, that adversaries can't damage them or can't gather information off of them. That doesn't really help, right? When you picture a ship or a plane, you can go kick the side of a ship. You know what it looks like. So cyber operations, like if you look at what my organization consists of, you could imagine a room full of big screens, like one behind you here, with very smart, well-trained technical people looking at the data that is flowing around the network, looking at what the sensors that we have on the network are telling us to understand whether or not the things that are happening on the network are acceptable or normal or indicate the presence or activities of an adversary. In a perfect world, we detect those adversaries before they're able to do anything nefarious. In fact, ideally before they've even succeeded at penetrating or compromising a network. But at a minimum, if we fail at that, then at least detecting them allows us to remediate the network before either more information can be lost or before they can do real damage to a network. I think we'll get into a little bit later, but those two separate things, stealing information is where our worries were a decade ago. The damage that can be done through cyber networks is beginning to become sort of more important and more concerning for us.
When you say damage, what does that mean?
Well, it could mean any number of things. First of all, the simplest, most common is having the data not just stolen but destroyed, so that there is no more data. And if you're talking about important information, that can be very damaging to individuals, to companies, to economies, to whatever data has been destroyed. And if you dial that all the way up to the most concerning sorts of levels, we've seen, at least in exercises, capabilities to deliver damaging effects against power grids. In fact, not in exercises. Russia has done this against Ukraine many times, bringing down power grids, critical infrastructure, et cetera. And in fact, in the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity's most recent report, they outline a shift, a worrying shift that we've seen from more of an espionage focus to not necessarily delivering these damaging effects, but adversaries like China beginning to position themselves to be able to deliver such effects. Prepositioning, we call it. So that's sort of the range of what cyber operations look like. It's very exciting for those to whom it's very exciting. It will never be a spectator sport.
Right. Like we were talking about this offline. Like it might be a breakthrough, but to an outsider, it's like I heard a beep. And then that's it.
Yeah, we don't even usually have beeps.
But you mentioned earlier it can affect economies, companies. So could you speak about coordination or working together with civilians, obviously, because cyber doesn't have, it's like there's no border that says, oh, this is where the military aspect ends, this is where the civilian aspect begins. So how important is that, and how do you go about that? Like working with private companies, universities?
So that's a great question. And I can really only answer it from the Canadian context. So from the Canadian context, the major organization within our government that looks after cybersecurity is the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. It's a civilian organization that provides advice, guidance, assistance. It's the organization you call if you have a problem that doesn't look like law enforcement or a crime. We are very close partners with that organization. In fact, we have a number of mechanisms where if anything really bad happens, we come together to discuss what are the potential impacts of that and how are we going to address or remediate that thing. And it doesn't really matter whether that thing is oriented against commercial infrastructure or our own defense networks. The same group of people is going to get together to think through what is the right approach for this thing. Is this problem best considered a law enforcement activity, in which case, in our case, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police would take lead? Is this thing a pure cybersecurity response, Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity? Is it a military thing, in which case it would be more in our lanes? What I would say is, fortunately, that third thing is quite uncommon. Most of the things are either cybersecurity problems or law enforcement, criminal sort of activity.
So there's always a need to work together. Like you mentioned, you're already trying to establish a network in other countries, but also so it's always a collaborative thing, right?
100%. So we talked about that sort of team sport with no bench limit. The very first people you really need on your bench are the other organizations in your own country. And we have a very close partnership. Indeed, some of the mechanisms that we have include members of my team that are directly working with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity to make sure that our ability to respond to those incidents is efficient, effective, fast.
We already mentioned earlier the Indo-Pacific. So in the past 2 years, year and a half, 3 years even, at least under the Marcos administration, officials from Canada have spoken a lot about how important the Indo-Pacific is, how important obviously the Philippines is, because that's how I hear about that, because they come to Manila. But from your perspective, what role should or what role can countries in the region, particularly the Philippines, obviously I understand you've already met your counterparts in the armed forces of the Philippines, what role can and should they play as Canada fortifies its own cybersecurity posture?
So what I would suggest, and I wouldn't presume to tell any country what it really should do. From our perspective, what we focus on is first and foremost ensuring the security of our own stuff. For me, as the commander of Cyber Command, I'm responsible and accountable for the defense of the networks that support the Canadian Armed Forces and the Canadian Department of National Defense. So that's sort of the basic. The more you can look after your own security, the better off that you'll be. But the next part is the bit that I mentioned, back to the team sport bit. And that is, I genuinely believe there is enormous value in building that team and building that team large and building that team deep. If you think about cybersecurity, when we say we have a partnership, there's a range of partnerships that are possible. Everything from things that are very superficial to deep and abiding partnerships. So the greater the number of partnerships you have and the deeper they go, the more powerful the collective will be in keeping a free and open and safe cyberspace for all of us. That's one of the things about the internet, is although all of it exists physically somewhere, when we hook it all together, it gains these extra properties. And if it's going to be safe, if it's going to be open, if it's going to be accessible and deliver for humankind what it can, we're sort of all going to need to play a role in keeping it safe and secure.
Yeah, I want to ask about opportunities for collaboration and convergence between the Philippines and Canada. But before that, I want to go back to your own experience. Like before we talk about the teams, I want to talk about the player. How did you fall into cybersecurity, cyber defense? Like, what's the story behind that?
Ooh, surprise question. Okay. Yeah, so I joined the Canadian Armed Forces, like I say, long before computers were, the computers were going to be big someday. When I did my graduate school, the internet only sort of barely existed.
There was potential.
There was potential. Yeah, if I started to explain it, only techies would understand. But there's real potential there. But that isn't what I did. I joined the military as a signals officer. For the first third of my career, I spent it cold, wet, hungry in the field, being an Army communications officer.
Yeah.
I transitioned out of that to do satellite and network communications. And I fell into cybersecurity, I don't want to say by accident, but quite late in my career, like halfway through my career, when I was given the opportunity to lead our cyber defense unit called the Canadian Forces Network Operations Center. And I fell in love with it. I love the type of people that are good at it. I love the things that it demands. I love the fact that it's a deep team sport, but that still respects expertise.
Right.
And so I've spent the rest of my career working very hard to stay involved in cyber operations. And I was given the somewhat unique opportunity that I've been able to do that. So I've spent basically the last 15 years in uniform being a cyber officer in the Canadian Armed Forces as we designed, built, developed, and fielded the kinds of capabilities that we have today.
And I guess part of that is also accepting that the great unknown of the future of cyber, right? Would that be important?
So 100%. I really believe that cyber is one of those things where if you don't approach it with a little bit of humility, you're gonna get stung.
Right.
And I like that too. I used to tell a story that when I was the commanding officer of a field signal squadron deep in the Army, I had all sorts of problems. The work was hard, but every problem had an answer. I didn't have the time, people, or equipment to execute the known answer, but there were no unsolved problems. It was all optimization. In cyber, it was completely the opposite. I went to find answers to the questions and nobody had any. I remember picking up the phone as I got that job and talked to my newly met U.S. colleague on a problem. And I say, you've been working on this for a long time with thousands of people. What's the answer? And he said, I don't know. It isn't this and it isn't this. And we're trying this now, but it doesn't look good. If you figure it out, let me know. And at that moment, I sort of knew I'd found my home. There were other people that hate that and they go do other things, but for me that was the bit that I loved.
It's really about finding your niche, right?
Yeah,
in
exactly.
This universe. Going back again to the team sport and a bench that I guess necessarily needs to keep on expanding, right? More and more players, more and more like-minded players, obviously. So far, based on your discussions with AFP Cyber Command, what do you see are spaces for collaboration, for working together between the two militaries?
Yeah, so we just held our first meeting today.
Yeah.
So it's probably a little bit too early to be getting specific on the kinds of things that are possible. But what I will say that we've done with other partners is we've done training exercises together. We've done training activities together, delivered courses together, all the way up to a very deep partnership with the country of Latvia, where we conduct continuous, ongoing, partnered cyber, it's called threat hunt, a specific type of cyber operation with them as sort of intimate partners. So the range of things that's possible is enormous.
Right.
Will take some time to build that relationship. It's not something that you just sort of turn on.
Yeah.
And I was really heartened today by a deep and open, frank conversation with colleagues at the Armed Forces of the Philippines.
Right, and zooming out, obviously, the Philippines and Canada were waiting for the signing of the status of the visiting force agreement. So I guess in the future, it'll be easier, perhaps,
Yeah.
for the two militaries to collaborate, to train together, to learn from each other.
Sure, yeah. There's probably a bunch of things we could do without, in fact, I can drop properly. There's a whole bunch of things we could do without a SOFA. On the other hand, it's very exciting to have a SOFA for a whole pile of reasons, and more narrowly to sort of my remit in cyber, be very helpful and enabling, just make things easier and expand the number of things that we can consider.
Right. My last question, I guess, in the Philippines, an emerging issue, not just in the military, but even in civilian spaces, right? And I think this is an issue in Canada as well, malign foreign interference. What would you personally look out for? This is your chance to give tips to our viewers as well.
Yeah.
But as commander of the Cyber Command, when it comes to malign influence, what things keep you up at night?
Yeah, so malign influence is actually not at the core of Canadian Armed Forces Cyber Command, but misinformation and disinformation is just a part of the world that we live in now. I think to my family, and in particular my son, and some of the malign things that just float through his computer on any given day. I guess the best tools that we have at the moment individually are education and critical thinking skills. It just so happens that I think critical thinking skills are incredibly valuable for 100 other reasons, but they are one of the best lines of defense against misinformation and disinformation. They're not going to solve everything. The quality of misinformation, is quality the right word? The nefariousness of misinformation is getting quite significant, but always better educated, more aware, more questioning audience, I think, is important in the media landscape.
Yeah, that's definitely a way to future-proof, or at least you get better chances in the future, right, of defending yourself from malign influence. The real final question is, again, this is your first visit to the Philippines. It's quite a quick visit. You just touched base with your counterparts in the AFP, but what are you looking forward to? Again, this is a new command. The AFP Cyber Command is a new command, but what are you personally looking forward to for the command and for the future of collaboration, I guess?
Yeah, so first of all, the future of CAFCYBERCOM I see as a globally relevant, real expert in the domain of cyber defense. I say that looking forward because I know there is almost nobody in the world who should claim that today. But we have had some very valuable experiences, and we've done a lot of really good learning. What I am also really interested in terms of the partnership here is I would love to build a deep and abiding relationship based on a foundation of trust that allows Canada and the Philippines, who have actually deep and long-standing people-to-people ties, to do that, to replicate some of that in cybersecurity and cyber defense. I know that there is a lot that the Philippines could teach Canada about cybersecurity, and I believe that there's a whole lot that we could share that would be of value and of use.
Right. Again, sir, thank you so much for your time. There are only a few people in the world, I think, who not only embrace but thrive in a world of uncertainty, and certainly grateful you're one of them, right? And I hope your counterparts in the AFP Cyber Command are as well. That's all the time that we have for now. It's going to be a busy day, I guess, for you tomorrow. It's been a crazy day, I guess, today also. I hope your stay in the Philippines has been fruitful and will be fruitful in the remaining time you're here.
Well, thank you very much. In fact, I look forward to seeing a little bit of the Philippines over the next couple of days.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'll be back.
Hopefully you will be back, with
absolutely.
more time and better understanding, I guess, of how the Philippines works by then. But that's difficult. Even I don't understand how the Philippines works sometimes. Thank you again for joining us, General Yarker. This has been Beko Pin, and you have been watching Rappler. Goodbye.